Ladies and gentlemen, Bryce Canyon here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, in fact, we're going to go into detail about the shooting of LaVoy Finicum and the events that led up to that. So let's just kind of get started with that. Let's talk about his life just a little bit. LaVoy was a guy who had 11 children. He was a rancher. His life dream was to own a ranch and to run cattle. He's a man who never so much as had a traffic ticket in his life. He was very law-abiding. He was a spiritual man, a church-going, God-fearing man. He also gave his time and his life to raising foster boys, some 50 foster children. In fact, it's not just that. He was one of two people in the state of Arizona who was certified to be able to take on the most difficult foster teen boys in the state. And that's who he was. Now, at some point, he decided that it was time to start educating people about the Constitution and about the government as it applied to owning land and property within the states. And he realized that the government, frankly, had a right to own property within the states, other than for the 10 square miles in Washington, D.C., and for essentially military installations, things like the post office, buildings like that. That was it. And so he began to spread the news. He got upset with the government trying to tell him how to run his ranch and his land. He knew what freedom was. He spent time out there on thousands of acres of wild, open land, and he knew when his freedom was being trampled on. In fact, he even said that there are some things more important than your life, and freedom is one of them. So he began to spread the word and go out there and educate other people, other ranchers, legislators, even the Attorney General of one of the western states. And so now you have a man who has a life mission of spreading the good news about what needs to change. And so that's sort of what took him up to Oregon, because he had read and heard about the Hammond family, and he knew that he had to do something about what was going on up there, because the Hammonds had been railroaded. They had been unfairly abused by the federal government. And so he went up there to advocate on their behalf, because the Hammonds were being sent back to jail when they had no business being sent back to jail. So as he got up there, it was quite unplanned. They ended up moving into the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. It was unplanned. Ryan Bundy had gone up there. He planned on doing some camping, and they ended up scouting an area, and they found this refuge that was empty and unoccupied. And they decided to go ahead and go inside. And so they took their camping gear, and they went inside there, and they had their firearms with them, and they went into an empty building that I say empty, there were no people, nobody was working there. It was wide open, wasn't locked at all. And then they made the announcement that, hey, we're here, and we're here to stay because we need to see some changes, and we need to see the Hammonds not go to jail, because when they took possession of the refuge, the Hammonds were still free, and they were trying to keep them out of jail. Long story short, once they got there, it hit the national media, became a big deal, but they were able to travel freely throughout the city, throughout the county. They were able to leave the state. They went to other counties. They continued to educate ranchers all around, and they met with elected officials there on the refuge. Nobody was stopped from going inside. Even protesters who believed just the opposite, they were still allowed to go inside and inside the refuge there and talk to people freely. Most people said they never even saw any guns when they were down there, but the press was calling them militants and calling them, domestic terrorists and everything they could. So, long story short, they had free reign of the town, and they went up and met directly with the FBI. They met directly with the sheriff. They went to public meetings, large public meetings, where they would sit in the bleachers just like everyone else, and that the public meeting would be filled with law enforcement. Law enforcement would never bother them. They wouldn't try to impede. They wouldn't try to arrest them. They wouldn't do anything. In fact, the whole time that they were there at the refuge, they were never so much as cited. Nobody came in to give them a ticket. Nobody came in to tell them they had to leave. The Closest they came to that was the sheriff and a guy named Steve Grasty, who's a county commissioner, asked them to leave. Steve Grasty kind of tried to tell them, but he didn't have any legal authority, and that was it. There was no other legal, and in fact, the President of the United States weighed in and said he considered it a local matter. Now, keep in mind, the President prides himself on being a constitutional attorney, and if he's calling it a local matter, in fact, he purposely avoided questions which said, isn't this a national refuge? Shouldn't this be something left up to the FBI? And he said the FBI is only assisting the local authorities, and that's it. And this was their, the way they saw things as well. They believed that this was strictly a local issue, that the federal government had no right to own land within the state of Oregon other than for military installations. And I won't go any deeper into that, but that's what they believed. And the president seemed to be backing that up. All of the authorities seemed to be backing that up. So long story short, these guys were able to come and go as they pleased. They were there going through the records, trying to find the original owners, because a lot of guys have been run off their land by the federal government. And the Hammonds, like I said, have been put in jail. So anyway, they had met in a neighboring county with Sheriff Glenn Palmer over in Grant County a few times. And Sheriff Palmer and a group of citizens over there asked them to come over and give a kind of a briefing, a seminar to several hundred ranchers and residents of Grant County who wanted to hear the good news about what was going on. Keep in mind, this is the sheriff who's endorsing this. All right, so they decided to, they announced it on Facebook and social media, and they said, okay, we're going to be going to Grant County to meet with a whole bunch of people here, and they were going to do it on a Tuesday, on the 26th. Well, everybody knew about it, including the FBI. And so the FBI decided they were going to set a trap. And they sent agents up. They made a big plan. They got together with the Oregon State Police and asked the Oregon State Police to help them out. And they went up there to a snow park, you know, for snowmobiles and things. And they got back off the highway, and they went up 2-3 cars at a time so nobody would notice them. And then they hit off on a side road, and they had a drone plane circling overhead that was watching the Bundy group as they left the refuge. And they went ahead on the road and they set a roadblock, and so sure enough, Ammon Bundy and a couple other people in one vehicle, and LaVoy Finicum and 4 of the people in his truck started heading up to John Day for the meeting in Grant County. And at about 4:30 in the afternoon, as they got closer, the FBI spy plane told the agents that, hey, they're just about to you. You need to pull down and be ready for them. So they did. They pulled down right next to the highway. And as they pulled down there, LaVoy went driving by. He was in the lead, and LaVoy looked over, and he saw them there out in the middle of nowhere, and he recognized immediately that it was law enforcement. And they were setting a trap, and he pointed at them just to let them know that he saw them. And he drove by, and then maybe 150, 200 yards behind him was Ammon's vehicle, being driven by what everyone believes is an FBI agent who was acting undercover. His name was given as Mark McConnell. And so they both drove by this road that all this law enforcement was staging on. So law enforcement pulled up behind them en masse. There were 10 or 12 vehicles altogether. They pulled up behind them. They finally hit the lights, tried to get them to pull over. Naturally, Mark McConnell, who was in the back, he pulled over right away. He had the leader, Ammon Bundy, and he had a guy named Buddha, who was Brian Cavalier. And so they pulled over, and LaVoy kept going. He didn't stop. And so three of the law enforcement vehicles went swinging around the first group, and they went after LaVoy, and they lit him up. And LaVoy didn't want to stop. He wanted to keep going, but Ryan Payne, who was sitting in the passenger seat in the front, he urged him to pull over, convinced him to do so. So actually there was a road on the left they were going to turn off on, maybe to try to lose the police, but they opted not to do that, and they stopped right there in the middle of the highway. And in that vehicle was LaVoy Finicum, who was driving. Ryan Payne was sitting on the right. In the right rear seat, they had Shawna Cox. And the middle rear seat was Victoria Sharp, 18-year-old singer, who was just going to provide some music at the meeting. And on the left rear seat was Ammon Bundy's brother, whose name is Ryan Bundy. And so they pull over. The police immediately start giving them orders, telling them to put their hands out the window and, put your hands and your heads out the window, essentially to show us that you're not a threat. We want to see your hands. So LaVoy Finicum sets his arms out and his head out the window on the left side. On the right side, Ryan Payne sticks his arms and heads out the window, and they're talking. They're actually both talking to different people. And while Ryan Payne has his hands out the window, all of a sudden a shot fires off, and something strikes Ryan Payne in the arm, and he jerks his head and arms back inside the truck. And he said, "They mean business." And then he's saying, "I don't know if this is worth it." Now, I don't know the exact order of how he was saying this, but that's what he's saying. "I don't know if this is worth it." And they had a little chat about this, and Ryan said, "I'm going to go back and see what's going on." So he gets out of the vehicle and he turns around with his arms up and walks back. He says, "I want you to know I've got a gun on my right hip." And they said, "Just don't touch it, you'll be okay." So he goes back there, and the people in the truck now don't know what's going on exactly, what they're talking about. But at this point, keep in mind, they felt like, they were in the right. They hadn't broken any laws, or it's certainly minimal laws. And at the same time, they were taking Buddha and Ammon Bundy and Mark McConnell into custody in the rear vehicle. So now, LaVoy is waiting, and they're calling out to him, and he's saying, "Hey, look, I'm not going to surrender. I'm going to see the sheriff in Grant County. We have places to go and people to meet, and you're wasting our time. We need to get going." And eventually what he said was, "Hey, look, we're going to go see him, and if you want to come, you can come along with us, and you can chat with us there." And the bottom line was that LaVoy knew this was a trap. He had seen all kinds of local corruption with the local officials, with the local sheriff, with the way the FBI had been building up and doing a doublespeak, talking out of both sides of their mouth, refusing to negotiate after they said they would. The FBI kept talking about a peaceful resolution, but they kept doing everything they could to escalate. And LaVoy knew that. He knew that this was a trap, and it was a very evil trap, and he was very concerned about it. So now as they're talking, and a shot has just been fired at the rig. They didn't know that it was a 40mm sponge-tipped round. For all they knew, it was an AR-15 firing a bullet at them. They didn't know what that shot was at that time. And so now they're talking amongst themselves in the car, and they decide, what are we going to do here? And Shawna Cox said, "Well, how far do we have to go?" And LaVoy said, "It's 50 some odd miles." And she said, "Well, I think we should just duck down and you should take off." So then Ryan Bundy says, "Well, who can we call? Let's call someone." So they're saying, "Yeah, let's call the sheriff. Let's call Sheriff Palmer over in Grant County. Let's let somebody know." So they try to get on their cell phones, and they have no cell phone coverage. They're in a dead zone, no coverage. So now they're going, "What the heck should we do?" And Ryan Bundy goes, "Dang it, I knew we shouldn't have stopped. We should have just kept going." LaVoy Finicum sitting in the front seat, he's overhearing this, and he's saying, "You know what? I think I just want to go. I want to take off." And he says, "You guys can duck down, and I can take off. That's what I want to do." And they're like, okay, we'll duck down. Let us know when you're going to go. We'll all duck. They'll probably start shooting at us. But what are they going to do to us? What are they going to do? They're going to force us off the road. What are they going to do? So anyway, LaVoy kind of gets a little countdown. He says, "Here I go. I'm getting ready to go. You guys duck down." And so he steps on the gas, and everybody ducks down, and he starts taking off, and it's really, really noisy. And Victoria Sharp says, "Are they shooting at us? Are they shooting at us?" Because they're hearing all these sounds. They're hearing this loud diesel motor. They're hearing road noise. Their windows are down. And they think they're actually getting shot at, and they probably expected to get shot at. They'd already been shot at once. Now they're running away. They're expecting to get shot at more. Okay, so so they start heading down the road, and they're trying to get away. and they want to get to the sheriff. And they just told the other law enforcement, LaVoy told them, hey, look, you can shoot me in the head, put your laser right here in my head. It's going to be a bloody mess, but it's going to be, my blood's going to be on your hands. You can shoot me in the head, or you can follow me to the sheriff. I'm going to the sheriff. We already have a meeting. You can come with us. And so then when he takes off, they do get some distance. The people in the back seat kind of sit up and look back out the window. They can see him quite a ways back, and then Ryan Bundy says, okay, they're catching us. They're coming up on us. You need to step on it. So LaVoy's stepping on it. Now, keep in mind that from the time they took off, from the time LaVoy said get down and he actually released the brake and stepped on the gas, 1 minute and 20 seconds later, LaVoy was laying on the ground, dead, because he'd been shot 3 times in the back. Okay, so from the time they took off, to the time they hit that roadblock, to the time he got out of the vehicle and ran across that snow and got shot and killed, it was only 1 minute and 20 seconds. Okay, so now here they are. They're running up the road. They're doing what they were doing. The vehicle's catching up. You know, the police are catching up to them. LaVoy's doing maybe 70, 80 miles an hour according to testimony. He starts to get around the corner. Suddenly he looks up there and he sees this roadblock. He immediately stands on his brake, and no sooner had he hit his brakes than all of a sudden they're shooting at him. Now at this point he's well over 100 yards. In fact, they probably started shooting at him at about 200 yards away, or getting ready to shoot, taking aim. The first bullet hit him at about 326 feet out, which is more than a football field away. Alright? So now as LaVoy is braking, he just came around the corner. He'd been looking in his mirrors. He looks ahead. Now he's got this dead man roadblock around a curve, around a blind corner, and he's dealing with these guys trying to kill him. They are literally shooting bullets. Shooting bullets with an AR-15. 223 rounds are coming at his truck. 3 of them, you can hear 3 of them hit his truck. He dodges the roadblock to the left, goes into the snow. The vehicle comes to a stop. The motor's still running. The wheels are still spinning. LaVoy throws his door open. He jumps out. He's throwing his hands up in the air, and as he's opening his door and jumping out, he says, "Shoot me! Shoot me!" And as he's just standing up, you hear 2 shots going off, and maybe more than that. But you hear boom, boom, and the window next to him, the passenger window, the rear passenger window, is blown out by one of the bullets, and another bullet had to just miss his head because, as it turned out, there was an FBI agent across the street trying to kill LaVoy as he got out of that vehicle. So now he comes around a blind corner. It's impossible for him to stop. He's getting shot at. He goes to avoid that roadblock. As soon as he jumps out of the vehicle to try to spare the others, no doubt about it, they're trying to kill him. They fire 2 more shots at him, trying to kill him. He takes a step. He's got his hands up. He takes another step. I'm sure he was sure that he was dead with every step he took. And he took 5 or 6 steps out there into the snow, or maybe more. He gets just behind the truck, away from the truck, to where now he's drawn fire away from the people in the rig. Nobody in the truck's shooting back. They're on the floor. They're hiding. They're trying to protect themselves, and that's what's happening. So now what? So now he's thinking, how come I'm not dead yet? How come these guys haven't shot me? He sees all of these guys sitting out in front with guns, looking at him. All right, and then he hears somebody behind him who'd been shouting orders, and someone's sneaking up behind him. Now at that point he turns. Now keep in mind, he had a gun on him, and under the law, because they had been trying to kill him illegally, he had a legal right to defend himself against these police. He could have come out of that rig with a gun and started shooting cops and doing it legally. All right, keep that in mind. But he's got his hands up, he's surrendering. He kind of makes a motion down. Now he had to be hysterical at that point. Finally he's turning. He's actually reaching into his jacket, and whether he had a gun or not, the police thought he did, and they were justified. And suddenly he had 3 shots in his back, and he was on the ground dead before he knew it, because one of those 3 shots went through his heart. and killed him instantly. All right? So now you can pause for just a second. You can think about what just happened. He goes around the corner. Before he even knows what's happening, they're trying to kill him. He avoids the roadblock. He protects all the people in the roadblock. He protects all the people in his vehicle. He pulls into the snow. He jumps out of the truck. Boom, boom. They're trying to kill him again. Blow out the window. It's all on the video. You can see and hear all of it. And now he tries to get away from the vehicle to save the people inside. He's saying, go ahead and shoot me. Is that what you want to do? Shoot me. And finally they do. They shoot him and he's dead. All right, so now let's kind of back up a little bit. The first thing I want to point out is this. I've read hundreds of pages of testimony. The officer that was shooting at him, okay, only one guy. Now, there's probably a dozen police there. Federal agents and Oregon State Police that are armed and ready. Out of all those people at that roadblock, only one person was firing at LaVoy's truck. And he said he felt that LaVoy's truck was threatening that roadblock and he was using his truck as a deadly weapon to attack the police. But guess what? Only one guy apparently felt that because nobody else shot at that truck. And a lot of guys were right directly behind those vehicles where if LaVoy would have run into them, surely they would have died. They would have been hurt really bad if they could have gotten out of the way, and I don't think they could have. Okay, but they didn't shoot. Only one guy shot at him. 3 of his rounds hit. He doesn't even know how many rounds he actually shot. Now, I don't know why he didn't count the ammo, the bullets that were left in his magazine after this was all done. For some reason, he didn't do that, and I'll get back to that. For right now, all we know is that he didn't do anything, but after he fired these shots, he turned around and he ran over to the truck, and he sat there and pointed his gun at LaVoy as LaVoy was fleeing, and he was just waiting for a reason to kill LaVoy. The same guy. Okay, now, he's the one who was firing at the vehicle that was coming up, and he's the one who fired the first 2 shots into LaVoy's back. Out of all of those agents on scene, this guy, for the first shots until LaVoy had 2 bullets in his back, this man is the one who fired all of them. All right? The other agent who shot LaVoy, the 3rd bullet that hit LaVoy in the back, was the guy who was following them as they were driving up the highway. He jumped out of his vehicle, he ran forward, he raised his rifle, he was watching LaVoy, and when he saw LaVoy turn and thought he was going for a weapon, he went to fire his .308 caliber weapon, and just as he was getting ready to squeeze the trigger, he heard the other agent fire off a couple rounds, and so he let the rounds go too. Okay, so that's what happened. So the same guy fired at the vehicle as it was coming to the roadblock. He ran across and he eventually shot to kill and shot LaVoy twice in the back. So now let's go back here a little bit and let's revisit this, shall we? The first question I have is, there were 4 people in that truck as it was going down the road. This agent who is firing on LaVoy's truck when it was 500 feet away, when he's taking aim and getting ready to fire when his vehicle's 500 feet away, there were 3 other people in there besides the driver. This guy's a lousy shot. I mean, he hit the mirror once, he hit the motor and the battery once. Not even the motor, he fired at the motor compartment. So here we go. What is he shooting at? You've got 3 people who could be hostages in that car. For all they know, the reason they didn't get out at that first stop was because LaVoy was holding them at gunpoint. They didn't know what the circumstances were. They didn't know why these people were still there. They had no way of knowing that. And yet this guy is shooting, and he could have easily injured or killed any of those 3 others who weren't driving the vehicle, who had no control over where that vehicle went. So that's the first thing that you have to ask is, why the hell was he shooting at that truck? It's ridiculous to think he was shooting at the truck. The second thing was, what if he would have shot and killed LaVoy, or hit him in the face, or blinded him with one of those shots? What if he would have shot the windshield out so that LaVoy got glass in his eyes? and he couldn't see what was going on. And LaVoy ended up hitting the gas pedal and running into the roadblock and killing the people in his car and killing people at the roadblock. If this guy would have hit him, I mean, what kind of idiot was this to do this shooting? Now keep in mind, they asked these guys to give blood and urine tests afterwards, and they refused. Now I have to wonder, were they taking steroids? These were SWAT team members. One of them said, hey, we go to the gym all the time, we stay in shape, we're on SWAT. Maybe they take steroids, and they didn't want anybody to know about that. Well, steroids can make you a little bit crazy and a little bit aggressive. And very possibly, this, I'm not saying it was, I'm saying very possibly, this guy was on steroids. So anyway, so you have to say, why was he shooting with passengers in the car? Why was he the only one taking any shots of the whole group? And why was it that he ran across and he was the first one to fire on LaVoy as well? Is he the only trigger-happy guy, the only gun-happy guy? I don't know. You've got to ask that question. So that's the first question about this guy. All right? Now, as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about something else. The second shooter, the guy with the 308 who was driving up behind him, who had his heavier weapon that day, and he drew on him, he said that he fired when he heard shots. Well, now I have to wonder what shots did he exactly hear, because, see, here's what happened. As LaVoy was getting out of the vehicle, two shots were fired at him from across the street up on the hill. That's what ballistics showed. They knew that there were FBI agents, HRT team, the hostage rescue team, HRT. They were across the street, up on the hillside, pointing down on LaVoy's truck. They fired at least two rounds at LaVoy, and they missed him. But here's the deal. After this was all over, when they did all of the officer interviews that night and the next day, and I believe one more time, they asked the FBI agents, did you fire your weapons? And they all lied. They all said no. Well, they weren't all lying, but everybody said no. Each and every one of them said no. But so at that point, they didn't know that there was an extra round. So when they went over the truck, they found the one that had gone through the roof of the truck and blown out the side window. And they knew that someone else had fired a round. So now they knew the only one it could be was the FBI agents, because they had overhead video. They knew where they were standing because the drone flying overhead. They had two different planes overhead taking pictures. And so they knew where these guys were standing. And they knew that it was one of these FBI agents that took the shot. So now they go back and they question them again. And this is like a month after the shooting. This is around the 17th. And the shooting took place on the 26th of January. This was like the 17th of February. They were going in there asking them, okay, guys, we found an extra bullet. Who shot it? Who's lying to us? Well, nobody would say. They say there were 5 FBI agents on that hostage rescue team, and they were all covering for one another. Either that or only one guy knew who shot, and none of the other guys knew who shot. So they're lying. So now the problem I have is how many shots were really taken, and who was shooting who and when, and has that video been altered? And Shawna Cox's video that she took with her phone, not with her phone, but with her camera, because Shawna Cox was going over to videotape the meeting, so she had a camera with her, a high-quality camera to videotape the meeting. And could they have, well, we know they could have, did they edit out the sounds of extra gunshots that we don't know about? We don't know. We don't know what happened. Now here's the deal. The guys that shot LaVoy, 2 Oregon State Police who admitted to aiming in the middle of his back and squeezing the trigger. One guy shot 1 round, the other guy shot 2 rounds. What they both said was, as LaVoy was turning around because he had this guy sneaking up behind him, trying to hit him with a taser, as LaVoy was turning around, now surely LaVoy thought he was dead already. He was surprised that he wasn't. So when he hears this guy coming up behind him, he's thinking, okay, here's the guy who's going to, put a gun to my skull or something and shoot me. So as he's turning around to this guy, they called him Officer Number 3, The officer 1 and 2, who actually shot and killed LaVoy, said the reason they fired was because they felt like officer number 3's life was in danger because LaVoy was too close and he could quickly pull a gun out and shoot and kill him. Okay, so that was bad planning. That was bad planning on behalf of the Oregon State Police. That guy should have ran up in the woods and stayed up in the woods, and if he wouldn't have come down, probably LaVoy Finicum would be alive today. Certainly it would have ended differently. Now, they were shouting for him to get on the ground. At that point, I doubt if he was hearing them. I think he was so focused on whether or not any bullets were hitting him, that's all he was hearing. But here's one more thing. They had spike strips set out before the roadblock in the right-hand lane, the northbound lane that LaVoy should have been driving in. Now, LaVoy didn't hit those spike strips. And they asked the officers, well, where were these set? And he said, well, maybe 30 or 40 yards from the roadblock. And he said, I couldn't rely on the spike strips because they were too close. By the time he hit them at 70 miles an hour, he would still slam into the roadblock. So now you have to ask yourself, who the hell was putting those spike strips out there? What were they thinking? That, in my way of thinking, all they could have been thinking was, hey, we'll flatten this guy's tires, we'll slow him down, he'll crash into the roadblock, and we can shoot them all there. You see, they had to know. They asked him, why didn't they put the spike? They asked another guy, why didn't you put the spike strip further down the road? And they said something screwy like, well, then maybe they would have run off the road in a bad place that wouldn't have been safe. What the hell does that mean? You know, they might have run off the road 100 yards down. Well, they were already shooting to kill it more than 100 yards away. So it just doesn't make any sense. That explanation doesn't make any sense. It was negligence, or it was purposefully set that way. The way this roadblock was set up, it would have been impossible to go around that corner at any highway speeds, in a truck like LaVoy's especially, without getting shot at. Because that officer would have justified shooting at anybody coming around that corner at that speed. Anybody. Because he said as soon as he saw the door, he was aiming to shoot. He determined they were going too fast. The guy who was following LaVoy said, well, he might have been doing at least 80 because I was trying to catch up to him. They said, well, did you check your speed? He said, no, I never checked my speed, but I was just aware that we were going pretty fast. So he said LaVoy might have been doing 80. Well, guess what? In the official investigation, they came back and said when that first round hit him, he was doing 50 miles an hour. So that means when LaVoy first saw the roadblock, he was standing on his brakes because he slowed down from 70 or 80 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour by the time he took that first round. Now, how they can know that, I don't know. I guess they were timing it off the airplane or something. And so they said he was doing 50 miles an hour, and they also said he was doing 50 miles an hour when he hit the snow. Now, if he was on the brakes, I don't know how both things could be true, but that's what they said. So if he was doing 70 miles an hour when he took the first round, he was still only doing 50 miles an hour, so he was on the brakes when he hit the snow. Now, here's something you need to know. These streets, during the day, were damp. Snow melts, sun comes out, warms up a little bit, the roads get damp. I used to live in that area. 4:30 in the afternoon, the sun goes down, everything starts to freeze. Now, don't just take my word for it. Now, one of the agents said, I think it was around 40 degrees. Well, in their official report, they checked the weather station down at the airport in Burns. The temperature at 4:30 in the afternoon in Burns was 27.2 degrees. So it was well below freezing. And this roadblock was at a higher elevation. And we know that normally the temperatures are colder at higher elevations. So we have to assume at that point that the roads were frosting up or freezing up in the areas that they were damp. That means that as LaVoy hit his brakes, now this truck is a 2015 Dodge Ram 2500 truck. It's equipped with something called anti-lock brakes. Those brakes will sense when they're skidding. So if you hit ice or you hit mud or you hit water, you can stand on the brakes with both feet pulling on that steering wheel as hard as you can, and those tires will not skid. The brakes will not allow the truck to slow down any faster than it can on ice or snow, because it will sense that those wheels are locked up and it will release those brakes. So LaVoy could have gone around that corner. As soon as he saw that roadblock, he could have been standing on his brakes, and the anti-lock brakes weren't allowing him to skid. They were causing him to continue to move forward. He was going into a death trap, and they were firing at his truck before he had any chance to do anything. And here's the way I explain to people. It's sort of like if you're driving down this highway, and let's just say it's a long straightaway, okay, where you can see well ahead, and you're going down the speed limit, let's say it's 55 or 65 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, 50 yards out in front of you, a policeman jumps out in front of you. He turns, he looks at you, he points his gun at you, and he starts shooting at you. And you're going, why were you shooting at me? And he's saying, well, it looked like you were going to run me over. And he goes, well, the only reason I would have ran you over is because you jumped out in front of me. It wasn't me. I'm just going down the road. You're the one who jumped out in front of me. And he's going, well, that's too bad. You were going to run me over, so I decided to shoot at you to try to stop you. And that's the exact same thing that happened here, ladies and gentlemen, with this roadblock. LaVoy comes around, maybe he's going a little bit too fast, but he comes around that corner. Before he had any chance to react, whether he was doing 55 or 75 miles an hour, he was taking bullets. And the reason they said he was taking bullets was because he was using his truck as a deadly weapon to ram a roadblock. That's what they thought. Well, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Okay? So now you've got a few things going on here. You have to ask yourself, who designed that roadblock? Well, the FBI did. And here's an interesting tidbit. They were going to set that thing further down the road in a canyon that was tactically superior to where they actually set it. So they were going to set up in a canyon down the road where they could put snipers higher up on the hills, and they could box them in from both ends and do all of that. But the problem was that canyon was in Grant County. This is what they said in their testimony. And they knew that the sheriff in Grant County would not allow the FBI into their county to do any kind of enforcement action. He'd already stated publicly that he felt that the Hammonds should have been released from jail. This is Sheriff Glenn Palmer of Grant County. He said that he felt that the Hammonds should be released from jail, and he also felt that the FBI should get out of Harney County. So the FBI knew that they couldn't get away with putting a roadblock up in Grant County. The FBI knew that. So they had to move the roadblock closer to Burns. They had to move it into those S curves where they did, because that's where we had Sheriff Ward, who was bowing, at the throne of the FBI. And the other thing was, they purposely selected a site where there was no cell phone service. They didn't want these guys calling the sheriff. They didn't want these guys calling their friends. They didn't want a bunch of patriots coming up there and shooting it out with the FBI. So those were two things right now that you have to think about that were going on. So now, regardless of how you see things, there's one more point to add, and that is, at that point, LaVoy had been laying there dead. Okay, they shot him, and now they focus their attention on the truck. Now they start bombarding the truck with all of these different rounds, trying to break the windows, trying to gas the occupants, setting off 9-rounder flashbangs, trying to confuse them, and all of that. Let's just say it took around 10 minutes. I didn't actually time it, but it was somewhere at length. Now, I used to be a firefighter, and when you get on scenes like this, the first thing you do when a shot's fired is you call to your dispatch and you ask them to send an ambulance. And you direct them to have the ambulance do what's called staging out of the area. So the ambulance gets close, but not where they're in danger, and they wait for the scene to be safe and secure when they're called in to go in and treat the patient. Well, they waited until they got everybody out of the truck, and then they went over and checked LaVoy, and then they called the ambulance. So they should have called it clearly 10 or 15 minutes earlier than they did, even though LaVoy at that point had already passed on. He was already gone. But that was just bad procedure. Somebody should have called for what we call an LSU, a life support unit, an ambulance, even though there was an FBI medic at the scene. The FBI did bring a medic, so they had someone there to treat. Probably they brought them to treat their own agents because they were afraid they were going to get shot. I doubt if they were too concerned about LaVoy. Obviously they weren't, because they just let him lay in the snow as all this was going on. Okay, so now we have to conclude. The one thing at this point that we don't have is we don't have the rest of the investigation. We don't have anything from the FBI. We don't know what they did, what they fired. We don't see the reports. They're keeping that a secret at this point in time. There's still an ongoing investigation to find out why this guy is lying. Okay, so assuming we know or we don't know about the FBI, you can still go back and you can conclude some things. Number one, they set a roadblock that would have been impossible to avoid getting shot out of. In other words, the way they set that in that blind curve at highway speeds, that sniper would have been shooting at anybody who came around the corner, even if they were standing on their brakes 50 yards ahead of where they were. He was shooting regardless. So it was a death trap. It was designed as a death trap. They couldn't even call for help. As LaVoy's getting out of the vehicle, FBI fires 2 shots. They're trying to kill him in his tracks. He didn't even have a gun in his hand. He had his hands up in the air, and they're trying to kill him. That's attempted murder. As they're firing on the vehicle as it's coming closer, they could have murdered the 3 other occupants in the car. When they finally killed LaVoy, the reason they killed LaVoy was because of their own negligence, because officer number 3 was trying to put a taser into LaVoy's back. He turned because he was alarmed. He felt his life was continued to be threatened. He finally maybe was reaching in to get a gun out of his jacket, and they shot and killed him. Total negligence all the way around. Clearly a wrongful death, in my opinion. The state and federal governments are liable for a wrongful death suit on behalf of LaVoy and on attempted murder charges and terrorism charges as it applied to Victoria Sharp, Shawna Cox, and Ryan Bundy. And I will take it one step further. In my opinion, they had no legal right to begin with, because that refuge was state land. It was never legally federal land, so there was no federal offense. So the FBI had no reason being involved in any of this. They shouldn't have been there. They had no jurisdiction, and you're going to find that's what's being argued in the courtroom with Ammon, Bundy, and the others, that the federal government had no jurisdiction. That means the traffic stop to begin with was unlawful. It was illegal. And one more question you have to ask yourself is, why did the FBI ask the Oregon State Police to come in and help them? Because the way it was set up, according to the testimony, was that the Oregon State Police were going to pull them over for the traffic stop, and then the FBI was going to take them into custody based on a 155-year-old law that they made up during the Civil War to try to rein in the southern states because they weren't cooperating. That's how old, and that's how decrepit, and that's how unusual that law was. The only complaint that they filed, the only indictment they filed against these guys. So you have to believe the federal government had no jurisdiction. They had no legal reason to be stopping them in the first place, to try to arrest them, to be shooting at them, or anything else. In my opinion, this is a wrongful death suit. They should be brought up on charges. State and federal officers should be going to jail, including Brett Singh, who is heading it up. He's an FBI agent who was already under suspicion for endangering national secrets when he was working as an assistant director in Salt Lake City, and then was transferred to Portland. So that's all I'm going to say for now, and that's plenty for you to think about. There's lots of evidence out there. There's lots of documents to look over. I'll post some of the links, and you can look them over. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to check back for more as soon as you can.
I love the feel of the wind on my face. I love the smell of the sage. I love the smell of the cedar and the pinyon. Yeah, the desert after rain. That smell is just unique. I love that. One of my most favorite smells. I love the feel of a good strong horse beneath me. I love being a free man. So no matter how long or short my days may be, I am going to live as a free man.
What's up, everybody? This is Jordan Page. In light of the recent events in Oregon, I just wrote a song that I want to share with you. This is called The Ballad of LaVoy Finicum. Subtext, Cowboys stand for freedom. He was a man who loved to walk the land, turn his cheek but also take a stand. When his conviction called, he followed what he felt was right. Well, there's no telling just what time will bring. You can live for nothing or for everything, but when the pushes come to shove, and tell me, will you fight? I'm only talking about a cowboy stand for freedom. I'm just talking about a name carved in a stone, a friend and brother to anyone. He's riding off into the setting sun. Drive on, cowboy, he's heading home. Well, there's almost right and then there's nearly wrong, as you live your life from sunrise to dawn, and then it's over and the moment's gone. You can testify to things unseen, but the world is blind, can't see a thing. All you can do is try to be a human being. I'm only talking about a cowboy stand for freedom. I'm just talking about a name carved in a stone, a friend and brother to anyone. He's riding off into the setting sun. Drive on, cowboy, he's heading home. I know not what course other men may take. I can't see that far down the road, but as for me and mine, make no mistake, the weight of justice is a heavy load, and I'm living by code. He left his home to go and take a stand, as voice rang out across the deafened land, and in the end it was a bullet that exposed the lies. A truth remembered is a battle won, though his murder cannot be undone. It rings out like an echo, thundering across the night. Here's to all the cowboys who stand for freedom. work is done. Well, Godspeed, cowboy, we'll carry